If you are interested in exploring these topics further, learning and connecting with like-minded individuals, check out the 3 Patreon discussion groups available. Just visit theinfinitesparkofbeing.com and click the participate button. I also offer a free meditation group online every Sunday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern. Just go to any of my social media profiles for the link found in my link tree. There's no pressure to be on camera or to actively participate in any of these groups. Just come and listen and enjoy. Join an online spiritual community of everyday people committed to understanding the human experience more deeply through spiritual practices that we can apply to our everyday lives. Join us. Welcome to the Infinite Spark of Being podcast. My name is Keith Welsh, and I want to start off by saying this episode is a big one. This is something I've wanted to do an episode on for a very long time. I'm checking a lot of boxes this year. This episode will require a lot of prefacing. This is one of those where we go deep under the surface. I'm excited about this, so get ready, suit up. We're diving into the hidden history of the 12 steps, Carl Jung, mysticism, and the path to awakening. So the preface to all of this is that while I'm not a member of AA, nor am I a member of NA, my experience lies in Al-Anon and ACOA. And for those of you that are in recovery and maybe still somehow unaware of those 2 aforementioned acronyms, let's just say if you'd ever like to know what it's like to be your child or your spouse, I'd be more than happy to tell you. Now, while I'm not a member of NA or AA, I have been working with addicts in the treatment field for quite a while. And I have a very special place in my heart for you bunch of maniacs for a few reasons. The main one would be that you are some of the deepest thinkers and the deepest feelers that I've ever met. And you guys have taught me more about my own threshold for compassion than any lama, guru, text, or swami. It's been a true lesson in learning to let go of the outcome. Now, I like to say that I was tricked into helping people for a living by a good friend of mine. I was just minding my own business, working as a graphic designer, when I was asked to come teach meditation and do dharma groups at this treatment center here in South Florida. Also, he's like, hey, you could work this music program with me. It's really cool. Well, I'd gone to school for design. Like, that was my career. And to change directions, I was hesitant, to say the least. I mean, I had no problem teaching this stuff to people that wanted that sort of knowledge, but to teach to a group of folks that, in my admittedly a complete misunderstanding on my part. I believed that everyone was either court ordered or they were being forced by their spouses. Well, that was something entirely different. I also thought, this stuff works for me, but I don't really push it on others. Well, when I found that it touched everyone, right? That they were picking up what I was putting down. I saw the impact, I had to keep going. And that led me later to get certified in a treatment for trauma that I became very good at. The center I was working at had a very strong VA first responder program. So I cut my teeth there with those folks doing that work. And that method later turned into what I now refer to as mind transformation and restructuring. If you're interested in that, go to the website, infinitesparkofbeing.com, click the About button, read about it. So what took or takes EMDR 8 to 12 sessions, I was accomplishing in about an hour. Like I said, I still do this work with people. And I know it sounds hard to believe, but it's true. At the most, maybe 2 hours if you need to get to know me. But, it's a horrible business model. I know. Anyway, I don't want to turn this into a resume, but I do want to say this. And those of you that know me through the world of treatment have heard me say this 100 times. I didn't get into this stuff because I was well adjusted. Right? That I was like born with a Rolodex of coping skills. I had my stuff. I still do. We all do. And I still work on it today. So anyway, So what we're going to talk about today, this is not just the history you might hear in a treatment center or a meeting room. We're going to talk about the real origins, the spiritual roots, the mystical undercurrents, and yes, even the occult influences behind what we now call recovery culture. And a huge part of that story involves one of the most famous thinkers in modern psychology, Carl Jung. His conversation with one of the early influencers of AA quite literally planted the seed for the spiritual framework that program grew from. So let's take our time. I'm going to try to walk through this slowly, but this is going to be more than a history lesson. This is a story about how human beings in their darkest hour found spiritual light. And I think there's something in that for all of us. If you don't believe that you have any business listening to this, then please ascend your ivory tower and wait there. I mean, after all, you just have 4 beers at the end of every single day, and maybe a few more on the weekend. You work hard, you deserve it. After all, there's a roof over the kid's head, there's food in the fridge, and the bills are paid. What else is there to being a parent and a spouse, right? That's it. So let's go way back and consider the history of alcohol in America. When you zoom out and you take a look at America's history with alcohol, it's a very, very old story, and it goes all the way back to colonial times. Alcohol was safer to drink than the water for most of the settlers, so it was fucking everywhere. It was a part of daily life. In fact, that was the case in most early cultures, right? Booze was just safer to drink than the water. But if we fast forward to the 1800s, that's when things start to change. The Industrial Revolution is in full swing. Cities are growing. Labor conditions are fucking brutal. And alcohol abuse is widespread, especially among the working poor. So the temperance movement, which was a social campaign that was trying to reduce or outright ban the use of alcohol, kicked off as a response to women who were tired of seeing their husbands come home drunk and violent, blowing the family's money in these bars and saloons. They're leaving the kids hungry. And these women weren't obviously wrong to be angry. Alcohol was fueling poverty and abuse on this massive scale. However, the problem with the temperance movement was that it took on this very harsh moral tone rather than an attitude of compassion. Addiction came to be seen as a character flaw, a moral failing. If you were an alcoholic, then you were less than, you were weak. Society at large started to look down its nose at anyone struggling with addiction, and by extension, the homeless and the poor. I mean, we still do it today. I believe that then and now, that looking down your nose thing is done because it hurts too bad to accept the suffering of life, right? So maybe look at the fact that it's by grace that you're not in that person's shoes. You're not better. You're not stronger or smarter. And it sucks to think about that or even consider that, because we all want to feel like we're someone special, that we're the strong one. And I get that. But we don't all start off at the same place in life. And that's just not a comment on socioeconomics, right? There are a lot of factors to consider in the formation of a human psyche. Like, I come from a long line of alcoholic Florida rednecks, but I never became one. Alcoholic, that is. I absolutely can be a Florida redneck about some things, but addiction never stuck with me. You could say I despise it because I was always around it and later in the music scene and then working in bars and clubs, but I honestly think I just got lucky, right? And I can see it standing like next to me. I'm only a few clicks away from that. Like, I can touch it. And if you've been listening to this podcast long enough, you know that I struggle with mental health issues of my own. I don't know why they never led me to addiction, or at least an addiction that was going to kill me quickly. I mean, it certainly led me to addictions that were going to kill me slowly. Either way, the point is, if you haven't landed in that cycle of addiction or self-harm, it's because you're fortunate. I mean, you don't really know if you're stronger than them, right? And you just know that you're not them. That's all you really know. You don't know what it's like to be them, to reason like them, to see themselves the way they see themselves. I guess what I'm saying is just be grateful instead of proud. Like, be humble. You don't know why or how that person got in that position. And I get it. You've got family. I've been there. right? And maybe you grew up with your brother or your sister and you know they had it easier, but you don't know what their experience of that thing was like, right? Like we talk about this all the time. The experience is in the mind. You can grow up in the same house with somebody, but you don't know what it's like to grow up in that house as them. It's different. If you ever found yourself in a very difficult situation, as many of us have, and you had the wherewithal to fix it or manage to be a productive, healthy member of society in spite of having, a rough time as a child or whatever it is, like, what if you were just grateful for the ability to think the way you think, to feel the way you feel, and to reason the way you reason, rather than scolding or judging them? That's all I'm saying. So in the 1930s, the Great Depression hits, and since last week's episode happened in the 30s as well, I find it very interesting to look at these things side by side. On one hand, we have Guy and Edna Ballard starting the I Am movement and talking to ascended masters. And on the other hand, all of this sadness and alcoholism. So overnight, millions of Americans were just tossed into poverty. People who were once solidly middle class are now living in Hooversville. These were makeshift shelters. And for those of you that don't know, Hooverville, they were shanty towns, like these makeshift encampments, and they popped up all over the place during the Depression. They were named after President Herbert Hoover, who they blamed for the economic fallout at the time. So veterans from World War I are now sleeping in parks. So the country is kind of upside down, and what's cheap, what's readily available, and what numbs the sting of hunger and despair and confusion, well, that's alcohol, right? That's what that is. So addiction and fucking homelessness became immediately connected. And not because people were bad or weak, but because they were human beings in unbearable pain. And they were looking for relief. It's that bug in our mind that says, if I could just get a little relief, I'll make it another day. We all know what that's like. And for those of you that maybe don't understand depression, it's physical. Right? It feels like something. It feels like a big, soaking, wet blanket all over your body. So to clear something up, those studies that come out now show that depression isn't a chemical problem, but more of a thinking problem. That doesn't make it easier to solve. In fact, that makes it harder to solve, because that means that there is a problem, a quote unquote problem, in the subconscious mind. Anyway, I don't want to turn this into a podcast about depression. So this is the backdrop for the birth of the 12 steps. The environment wasn't some clean clinical lab. It was suffering. It was despair. It was people on the absolute edge grasping for something, anything that could save them, or at least give them some sort of relief. Now, let's zoom in a bit tighter. If you've ever spent time in a 12-step program, you've heard the names Bill W. and Dr. Bob. Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob Smith. These two men founded Alcoholics Anonymous in 1935. But what often gets left out of the story is just how fucking mystical these guys were. Bill Wilson especially. This guy was hungry for spiritual experience, and not just church on Sunday morning. I'm talking full-blown mystical awakening. Bill W. had been through the ringer. He'd lost jobs, lost opportunities, alienated his poor wife, Lois, wrecked his health. He'd tried everything. Everything that was available at the time to stop drinking. But, like a lot of folks, nothing stuck until one fateful night in 1934 when Bill found himself detoxing in a hospital bed after a final bender. At the time, hospitals were using belladonna treatments for alcohol withdrawal, which, by the way, is psychoactive. So you've got Bill Wilson coming off of alcohol, full of belladonna up to his eyeballs, exhausted, desperate, hopeless, and then it happens. He had what he described as a white light experience. He later wrote, "Suddenly the room lit up with a great white light. I was caught up in ecstasy, which there are no words to describe. It seemed to me in my mind's eye that I was on a mountain and that a wind, not of air, but of spirit, was blowing. So from that moment, the obsession to drink was lifted, just gone. Now, to his credit, Bill didn't just dismiss this as like some fever dream, hallucination, or even luck. Like, he knew it was something bigger, and he spent the rest of his life trying to understand it, trying to replicate it for others. He just ate up spiritual literature, anything from Christian mystics to Eastern philosophy. He read Swedenborg, a Swedish philosopher and mystic who wrote about spiritual realms and visions, and then he stumbled upon The Varieties of Religious Experience by William James. Highly recommend it. In this book, he talks about James, not Wilson, talks about people in the depths of despair. Sometimes they undergo these radical personality transformations, and they're often sudden and unexpected and almost always spiritual in nature. Remember, we discussed this in the episode on the Dark Night of the Soul. We also discussed this in the first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, the Yoga of Dejection. Nothing evolves without discomfort, dejection, suffering, whatever you call it. That pain is a requirement. Well, Bill W. saw himself in those pages, and it convinced him of something critical, that sobriety was not a matter of willpower alone. It was a spiritual transformation, plain and simple, and it had to be treated that way. Now, there's a part of this whole thing that a lot of people in recovery circles, they know about it, but they don't always grasp the weight of it. Enter our buddy Carl Jung, one of the most respected psychologists of his time and still today. He's the father of analytical psychology and quietly one of the architects of the spiritual foundation of recovery. There was a man named Roland Hazard III. Anyway, he was a wealthy, educated American who had tried everything to get rid of his alcoholism. He tried hospitals and treatments, you name it, nothing worked. So he was desperate, and he went to Jung in Switzerland. Jung treated him for a year, but eventually had to tell him something brutal. He said, "You are, in my honest opinion, beyond the reach of medical science. For you, there's only one hope, a vital spiritual experience." Jung explained that for certain types of addicts, no amount of therapy, no amount of willpower, or even discipline was going to cure this obsession. The only thing that could bring true transformation was a profound, life-altering spiritual awakening, the kind that shakes you to your core and really rebuilds you from the inside out. And here's what's fascinating. Jung didn't just say that as a throwaway line. He knew exactly what he was talking about. So he pointed Roland toward the historical accounts of conversion experiences, where these hopeless cases had been radically transformed overnight by contact with the divine. So Roland took Jung's advice seriously. He got involved with the Oxford group. This was a Christian fellowship that we'll talk more about in a minute, but through that, he found sobriety. But more importantly, Roland carried that message to another man. His name was E.B. Thatcher, and E.B. brought it to Bill Wilson. So if you draw a map, it's pretty clear. It's Jung, Roland, E.B., Bill Wilson, Alcoholics Anonymous. Carl Jung, planted the spiritual seed of AA, and I think it's one of the most beautiful parts of the whole story. It shows that at the very beginning of the movement, long before the steps had been written down, the foundation was spiritual transformation. It wasn't punishment, it wasn't moralism, but awakening. Now, let's go deeper. The Oxford group. This is where the structure of the 12 steps really starts to take shape. But you might be surprised to learn that this wasn't your typical religious club. Maybe you're not surprised because of the nature of this podcast. But the Oxford group was a movement that emphasized personal change through spiritual practice. Not through dogma. right? Their motto was a spiritual revolution. They believed that personal transformation could change society one person at a time. They practiced what they called the four absolutes. So it was absolute honesty, absolute purity, absolute unselfishness, and absolute love. Now tell me that doesn't sound like the foundation of spiritual practice across every single tradition. But here's the part that gets me. The Oxford group also practiced guidance. They would sit in silence, ask for divine direction, and then write down the thoughts or messages they received. Now, if you know your spiritual traditions, you know that this is essentially automatic writing, which is a method used in mystical and occult circles to channel higher wisdom. It also sounds a lot like a Quaker church service. So this practice of listening for inner guidance is directly echoed in step 11 of AA. Sought through prayer and meditation, we improve our conscious contact with God as we understand him, praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. It's right there. Trauma responses, anxiety, ruminating thinking, grief and loss, stress, these are all reoccurring patterns in the mind. They're often the result of reacting the same way over and over again. Why do we do this? Because the mind believes the past is still here, happening now, causing the nervous system to respond accordingly. What the mind perceives, the body feels. Mind transformation and restructuring, MTR, offers a pathway to release these patterns. It guides both the mind and the nervous system out of these repetitive cycles and into a lighter, freer way of being. If this resonates with you, feel free to reach out via direct message or through the contact section at theinfinitesparkofbeing.com. You don't have to live the way you've been living. Change is possible. And when you zoom out even further and start to see these deeper esoteric connections. The Oxford group's emphasis on confession and restitution, that's the purification of karma. Their practice of surrender, that's ego death. Their outreach to others, that's the bodhisattva path in Buddhism. They weren't just doing Christianity, they were living ancient spiritual principles, and they were repackaged in a way that made sense in the modern era. To the Western world. So now let's get into the steps themselves. This is where you realize these aren't just steps towards sobriety, right? They're steps towards spiritual awakening. And I want to go step by step here, pun intended. So step 1, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol and that our lives had become unmanageable. This is ego death. In mystical traditions, this is the beginning of every true transformation, right? You acknowledge that the small self, the ego, the illusion of control is not enough to carry you. This isn't just admitting defeat. This is acknowledging the reality of the situation. It's surrendering to truth. This is Arjuna dropping his bow at the start of the Bhagavad Gita, right? The start of the Gita is the yoga of dejection. It's chapter 1. I just can't do this. So in the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna and his brothers are about to go to war with their cousins and their uncle, the blind king, right? In the allegory, Arjuna's family represents the past life of the aspirant, right? It's all your old habits, and you have to go to war with them every single day if you plan on making big changes in your life. And very often, right, the decision to turn your back on the past to move forward in a positive way can be very difficult and even painful. Step 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. This is recognition of the divine. It's the mystical awakening to the fact that there is a greater order in the universe. In Hermetic tradition, this is alignment with the all, capital A. You start to sense that life isn't random, that there's a deeper intelligence here. This is the beginning of Arjuna recognizing the fact that Krishna, his dear friend, who has always been around ever since childhood, is actually the Lord. This is a heavy allegory because it took dejection, fear, and war with the past for Arjuna to recognize that he has had the voice of God in his ear this entire time, and is only now starting to realize it. He is now recognizing Krishna's wisdom, and that Krishna, his dear friend, has always had his best interest at heart. And that by listening to his dear friend, Krishna, he can lift his head and learn to fight this battle despite this overwhelming fear. Step 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. This is full surrender. This is dropping the illusion of control and trusting the divine flow. In yogic terms, this is Ishvara Pranidhana, surrender to God. Or if we go the Florence Scovel Shinn route, this is listening to the divine mind, our superconscious mind, our higher self, as opposed to the scared small self or the conscious mind, a mind that worries and whines and thinks negatively. Now, this is much harder than it may seem. Releasing the burden to God would mean letting go of the worry. So you have a desire, something you'd like to experience, a new job, a better life, whatever that means to you, and you let God have it. So you pray, you make it known to God, or whatever the word you're using for source is, but you let go of the worry. Yes, there are things to do, so you do them. But you do what's appropriate and you stop doing what's inappropriate, right? There's nothing else to do. If it's divinely meant for you, as Florence would say, then God will make it available to you. If it's not meant for you, it won't be there. And that means it's not for you. Like, think of like running a race, right? You train, you diet, you dedicate yourself to becoming the best runner you can be, right? And then you either win or you don't. You did all the right things. You did what was appropriate, right? And God will handle the rest. You did your best. It's either yours or it's not. Step 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. This is deep introspection. This is the purgative stage of the mystical path where you turn inward. You face the shadows and you take honest stock of your inner landscape. And this isn't some bullshit Instagram shadow work where you act like an asshole because you're usually just so toxically positive, but today you're going to act like an asshole and then you tell people that you're embracing your shadow side, right? This is deeper than that. This is where the absolute honesty part of the Oxford Group's 4 Absolutes begins. This is something that only you know. No one else knows your inner world. No one really knows what you really think. Right? There are things that we lie to ourselves about, things that we won't admit to ourselves, because if we do, they might be real. And that's scary. But these are things that, in my opinion and experience, keep people sick, right? You need to look at these things and only you know what that means, right? Honesty isn't just something that is vital to our relationships with others, but it's also vital to the relationship we have with ourselves. Remember that. And maybe it's not something that we, lie to ourselves about, but it might be something that we've been pretending didn't happen. Maybe it's something from our past that we just need to acknowledge, right? This is a tough one because we're the only one that knows, we're the only one that really knows. And I've seen it a lot in people. They say they stay absolutely sick of this stuff because they just can't. It's that thing where they didn't lie, but they're just not telling you. It's like that, but you're doing it with yourself. So step 5, admitted to God and ourselves and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. Confession, purification, and Catholicism, this clears the slate. Right? You unburden your soul. This always gets people tight. And I think it gets people tight because of the way it's explained in the Christian culture that you need to admit these things to a priest or some other figure so that God will forgive you. Well, the truth is that God already forgave you, right? To forgive simply means that you're no longer angry about something that happened. That's all. So no, God isn't angry, right? Anger is a human thing, and God's not a human with biological imperatives, so fucking forget it. Or if he is, right, and we go the Mormon route and he has certain, I don't know, if he is a human, right, then he has certainly transcended the pettiness of anger. So we don't need to confess anything to another mortal in order to get God to forgive us. However, when we just say it to someone else, it unburdens us. That's really what it's about. We don't know the weight of these things until we share it with someone else. And just say it and just offload this thought. Sometimes it's as simple as writing it down and reading the list to someone. Trust me, when I tell you this absolute honesty thing is very, very important. This is about the weight that these things carry, and they do have a weight. Something I've noticed over the years doing what I do with people, when we move the thing, whatever the thing is, they physically feel lighter. And I think there's something to that. Step 6, we were entirely ready to have God remove all of these defects of character. This is the turning point, the willingness. This is standing at the edge of the cliff and saying, I'm ready. In mystical traditions, this is the point of surrender, where you become receptive to transformation. It's this spiritual posture that says, I can't fix this by myself. I'm ready for a higher power to do the work within me. How do we do that, though? Right? This is a confusing one because there are no instructions. There's no ritual that you do that then suddenly your defects of character are removed. However, if we look back at steps 1 and 3, we can see where letting go, releasing the burden to God, and learning to ride that river rather than fighting with it. That's when these defects or these glitches in our character start to fade. Let's look at Buddhism, right? The first noble truth, life is fundamentally unsatisfying and filled with suffering. Second noble truth, that dissatisfaction and suffering is perpetuated and initiated by grasping and clinging, which can be seen as, if you let go and stop fighting with life at every turn and just do what's in front of you, understanding that what is divinely meant for you will land in front of you, then you will more than likely stop engaging in those aspects of your character that keep you miserable and sick. So this part, this part about being entirely ready means that we are ready to release the burden to God, as mentioned before. Step 7, humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. This is the invocation, the prayer, the actual request, and it's not a demand. It's humble. It's an act of devotion. In hermetic or alchemical terms, this is where the refining fire begins. It's the moment when the transformation of lead into gold begins inside of the heart. You ask to be changed. So the prayer goes, my Creator, I am now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. Now, if you aren't willing to do all of the steps previously and live accordingly, then this request is empty, right? Steps 6 and 7 are often used as excuses. I prayed and I'm still an asshole and well, fucking probably. Each of these steps requires the previous step. If you're taking shortcuts, right, trying to do one thing but not the other because the other's confusing or difficult, then yeah, none of this will work. The 12 steps are a practice, and it's not one that just gets done once, right? You don't just do this one time. Those of you that know that they need to be done frequently and often. In fact, that's how they were originally done. In fact, they'd go through them all in 1 or 2 nights, as opposed to now where people take a fucking year to go through the 12 steps, right? This goes back to what I was saying. If you show up for the practice will show up for you. I've said it a million times. Step 8, made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. So steps 8 and 9 are linked together, but this step 8 is all about readiness. It's energetic preparation. You're looking at the past honestly with humility, and you're not rushing out to fix things. You're sitting in the discomfort of knowing who you've hurt and getting to a place where you're willing to take responsibility. That's big. That's deep accountability. This list is very, very important. And when it comes to not rushing out to fix things, often people do that because it'll make them feel better. But this isn't about you feeling better. This is a deep education in making this list and being with this list, if that makes sense. Remember, addiction is about a lot of things, but the avoidance of discomfort and grasping at things to remove that discomfort is one of the biggest. Step 9, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. This is sacred action. It's about repairing what can be repaired, cleaning up your side of the street, as they say, and freeing yourself from the weight of unfinished spiritual business. But it also requires discernment. You don't go out there hurting people under the banner of making things right. This step is both justice and compassion. Sometimes they don't want to hear from you again, or at least not for a while. So how do you make an amends to them? Well, you do what's called a living amends. You live in a way that assures them that what you did will never happen again, right? You start living right instead of like a sloppy, messy pain in the ass that simply becomes a fucking emotional terrorist to those around you. And that's something to remember. Just because you're ready to make an amends doesn't mean they are. Sometimes, again, they might never want to hear from you. Sometimes the compassionate thing to do is simply go live your life and live it properly. Step 10, continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. This is ongoing self-reflection. This is not a one-time process. Again, this is daily spiritual hygiene. There are a lot of great 10th step apps where you can sit in bed at the end of your day and use this app to answer questions about your day, right? Where did it go well? Where could it have been better? This is so important. Understanding that this is not a one and done deal is going to be vital. This is like any other spiritual practice. These steps are an ongoing spiritual practice. You don't do certain sadhanas one time and like you're fixed. And that's the same, like we apply the same kind of rationale to like, I'm going to go to South America and do ayahuasca. And then you come home and you're still a fucking prick. Or you go to a yoga retreat or a meditation retreat and you think that you're just going to come home this awesome changed person, but you're not. Like you still have work to do. There's things to take care of. Step 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God. This is daily practice, meditation, communion with the divine, actively cultivating the connection to higher consciousness. This is like the episode on decentralized spirituality when I said to spend time just talking to God. It doesn't need to be formal or anything like that. But to keep that line of communication open is very, very important. Make a habit of communicating with God. And finally, step 12, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to others. This is the Bodhisattva vow. This is service to others, the natural outflow of genuine awakening. And remember, awakening isn't always a thunderbolt to the head that changes you forever. It's more often than not a slow whittling away of who you once were. It takes time. So instead of a spiritual awakening, let's just say, now that we are spiritually awake, as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to others, right? Instead of spiritual awakening, we're spiritually awake. Also, this isn't about becoming a missionary for AA, right? This is about being healthy enough that, like Ram Dass would say, you are an environment that which someone else would want to come up for air. You are ready for them to come up and play, right? You are the space that they can do that in. So you see, when you lay it all out like this, it's a spiritual path disguised as a recovery program. It's practical mysticism for ordinary people. It's the alchemical transformation of human suffering into spiritual awakening, and that's why it works. Now, here's a chapter of the story that almost never gets told, and I'm going to do my best to stay on the rails. My best is different than your best. Anyway, so let's fast forward a bit to the 1950s. Bill Wilson, always the seeker, starts exploring with another avenue for spiritual awakening. Psychedelics, specifically LSD. And don't let this actually let it rattle you. I don't give a shit. But at this point, LSD was being studied seriously by psychiatrists as a way to catalyze profound experiences of unity and ego dissolution. So psychiatrists at one point were interested in profound experiences of unity and ego dissolution, as opposed to now, where they're interested in creating zombies that the insurance... Anyway, Bill partnered with Dr. Humphrey Osmond, and this guy is interesting. He coined the term psychedelic, which means mind manifesting. So it means mind manifesting. Psychiatrists were studying that, which is fucking cool. Anyway, Osmond believed that LSD could offer alcoholics the same kind of spiritual experience that Bill had with his white light moment. Anyway, Bill tried it, loved it. He found it very powerful. He described a profound sense of interconnectedness, the walls of the ego melting away, and an overwhelming sense of peace. Now, it's like, I'm staying on the rails. I'm not going to get into this. Anyway, I would like to be clear though. Bill didn't see LSD as a replacement for the steps. He saw it as a tool. It was like a spark. It was a way to get people who were spiritually blocked. He could get them to experience this crucial moment of awakening. And I've known a lot of people that have had that, and a lot of people that just used it as an excuse to get high. But here's the thing. AA leadership was already wary of public perception, so they distanced themselves from the whole thing. They wanted to keep the message clean, simple, and uncontroversial. Like they say in AA, keep it simple, right? Keep it simple. Simple coffee, simple cigarettes, simple sugary food, donuts, yada yada, Pop-Tarts, simple energy drinks, simple carbohydrates, simple SSRIs, but definitely not something that would plug you into the interconnectedness of all things. Let's not go too deep here. We wouldn't want to get away from sharing the war stories about the time you robbed your mother and stole your wife's grandmother's wedding ring to buy crack, or the time you hid booze in your baby's stroller at a family cookout. God knows everyone needs to hear more of those stories at an AA meeting. So this chapter on the God-given technology of psychedelics was quietly buried, but it happened. And I think it's essential to our understanding of the depth of Bill Wilson's commitment. He wasn't just interested in sobriety. He was interested in awakening the human soul any way he could. And that's why Bill W. will always be my favorite. So there you have it. Now, let's come back to something that gets overlooked, and that's homelessness. What you need to understand is that the early days of AA weren't filled with corporate executives and suburban moms and dads. The rooms were filled with the people that society had thrown away, the so-called hopeless cases, the men and women sleeping in alleys, under bridges and shelters. And what I find profound is this. It was precisely these people who were often the most spiritually open, because when you've lost everything, you're not distracted by illusions of control. You've got nothing left. You know, capital K, in your bones, that you are in fact completely powerless. And that creates a kind of spiritual, like a fertile ground for spiritual growth that you simply can't manufacture in a comfortable life. And this is the paradox of the spiritual path. Suffering cracks the shell of the ego, and the cracks are where the light comes in, as Leonard Cohen would say. So these early AA meetings gave folks not just a chance at sobriety, but a chance at dignity, at spiritual renewal. They created community, purpose, and hope, all of which are deeply spiritual needs. This is a huge part of the hidden history. Recovery wasn't just born in a polished church basement with coffee and donuts. It was born in the streets, in the missions, in the places most people were afraid to go. And that matters, because it tells us that the path to awakening is not reserved for the privileged. It's for everyone, maybe even especially for those at the end of their rope. So here we are. When we look at the full story, the poverty and despair of early America, the spiritual seeking of Bill Wilson, the mystical influences of the Oxford group, the quiet nudge from Carl Jung, the hidden chapter with psychedelics, and the forgotten homeless roots of the movement, we see something very clear. The 12 steps are not just about drinking. They're about awakening. They're about liberation. They are about transforming human suffering into spiritual gold. And I would argue you don't have to be an alcoholic to walk this path. The principles are universal. Honest self-examination, confession and amends, daily spiritual practice, service to others, humility, surrender. This is the path of the mystic. This is the path of awakening. And I think that's why nearly a century later, the 12 steps are still saving lives. Not because they're perfect, they're a perfect clinical tool, but because they are a spiritual technology, ancient wisdom repackaged for the modern soul. So wherever you are on the path, whether you've struggled with addiction or not, know this: you're not alone. You're never alone. You are awakening. Your transformation, your liberation, it is possible. It's right here waiting for you. And as always, I love you. I love you. I love you. You saved me so many times, and you're doing it again. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. If you enjoyed this content and would like to support its creation, visit theinfinitesparkofbeing.com. There you can explore the various ways to get involved and support this work. Click the About button, read a little bit about me, and see what I have to offer you through the one-on-one sessions. Don't forget to check out the Patreon tiers, where we're building a community of everyday people with not-so-everyday interests. You'll also find the online apparel store. And as always, head over to the Participate button and join us. Together, we're growing a community of spiritual seekers just like you.